Hello world, it's been a couple of days since the release of Nintendo Switch 2, and as you know, it got backwards compatibility. So I was curious how the games from the first Nintendo Switch, the original Nintendo Switch, would work on the Nintendo Switch 2. And in this video, I took 10 games that I was interested in to test and to see how they work and if they work at all on the new Nintendo Switch 2. So without further ado, let's just dive right into this video. And we're gonna start with Dark Souls Remastered. This game was especially interesting for me to test just because I really liked the port from the original Nintendo Switch, but unfortunately, just through the backwards compatibility, nothing really seems to be changed. We got the resolution of 1080p in a docked mode and 720p in a handheld mode. Frame rate is capped at 30 FPS both docked and handheld. This gotta be the biggest issue of this game because, as you know, Dark Souls or any Souls-like game really dependent on FPS, and 30 FPS is not the best frame rate for that kind of games, but it still doesn't make it unplayable. It just makes it way less comfortable to play. But other than that, the looks of the game are great, and even in 720p the game looks just awesome. Just because of the game design, it looks great. But of course, the update with 1080p resolution in a handheld mode would be just awesome. This next game here is probably going to be a big surprise for a lot of you, but I was really curious to test this game in particular just because I really love Spongebob franchise and I really like the game itself, and even though I never beated it fully, I really like the gameplay itself. This is the case where I felt like the game is actually improved natively on Nintendo Switch 2 just because it didn't have a locked 30 FPS frame rate and it actually aimed to go up to 60 FPS on the original Nintendo Switch and failed miserably because it was mostly going between the high 30s to low 40s, occasionally dipping to like 30 FPS, and the gameplay itself wasn't really satisfying on the original Nintendo Switch. But here on Nintendo Switch 2 we got something very different. The whole gameplay is really smooth. I didn't notice any dips, and you can see it on your visuals. No lags, no dipping, all is smooth and very satisfying to play. The resolution is still 720p in both docked and handheld modes, but this game being a cartoonish style game, it looks great. The next game in our list is Ori and the Blind Forest. This game is such a unique experience. Very beautiful game design, sound design, everything is so calming, relaxing. The whole gameplay is beautiful. If you ever played this game, you know what I'm talking about. Actually, it performed really well on the original Nintendo Switch 2, but I just wanted to include this game into this list just because how much I love this game and how beautiful it is. And here, of course, we got 60 FPS both in docked and handheld modes. The game works perfectly. The resolution is 1080p in docked mode and 720p in handheld mode. The next game here is one of the best third-party ports for original Nintendo Switch, and of course I wanted to test it on Nintendo Switch 2. The game looks awesome even in 720p in handheld mode and in 900p in docked mode. And even though it worked really well on the original Nintendo Switch, the frame rate could actually dip to the mid-40s at some very high demanding scenes. But here on Nintendo Switch 2, just because of the hardware, it looks like it's gonna work at stable 60 FPS all of the time, which is great. Hades, in my opinion, is one of the best looking games ever on the original Nintendo Switch, and especially on the Nintendo Switch OLED. It looked incredible just because of how much dark tones this game got. And even though we got LCD screen on Nintendo Switch 2, it still looks incredible. We got stable 60 FPS just as we had on the original Nintendo Switch, and the resolution of 1080p in docked mode and 720p in handheld mode. Doom 2016 for Nintendo Switch is my personal pain. Even though a lot of players praise this game for Nintendo Switch, I don't like the port. For me, it's so unplayable that it actually caused me a lot of mental pain. Like, I'm really struggling trying to play this game on the original Nintendo Switch, and here on Nintendo Switch 2, unfortunately nothing changed natively. I hope that the developers are gonna make the update for this game for Nintendo Switch 2. It's just must have for this game in particular. And still, even with all of the problems, we got stable 30 FPS on Nintendo Switch 2 now, because with the original Nintendo Switch, they claimed to have 30 FPS, but in actuality, we always had dips under 20 FPS, and it was very unplayable at some high demanding scenes. The resolution in this game is dynamic. In docked mode, the resolution typically hovers around 612p, occasionally reaching up to 720p in less demanding scenes. In handheld mode, resolution averages around 600p, which is very bad. The next game in our list is Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. Actually, one of the best third-party ports from the original Nintendo Switch, and here on Nintendo Switch 2, it works even better in terms of the frame rate. Now, finally, we got stable 30 FPS, and even though there wasn't really much dips on the original Nintendo Switch, here it is finally now perfect in the terms of the stability of those 30 FPS. But of course, with the hardware and the power of Nintendo Switch 2, we want 60 frames and 1080p, so we are waiting for the updates for sure. The resolution of this game is dynamic. In docked mode, we got scaling between 900p and 1080p, depending on the scene's complexity. In handheld mode, dynamic resolution scaling between 720p and 576p, adjusting to maintain performance during demanding sequences. This one here is one of my favorite childhood games ever, so do not ask me why did I add it. Lego Marvel Super Heroes. Unfortunately, this port wasn't the best at the original Nintendo Switch, and we got the same issues here on the Nintendo Switch 2 as well. 30 FPS for such game is just not enough. With the resolution, we got approximately 900p in docked mode and 720p in handheld mode. But honestly, even with 720p in handheld mode, the game looks really blurry, so it's not really great. The next one here, Need for Speed Hot Pursuit Remastered, is one of my favorite third-party games from the original Nintendo Switch, and now we can enjoy it on Nintendo Switch 2. The biggest problem of this port for me on the original Nintendo Switch was locked 30 FPS. And unfortunately, just because it's locked, nothing changed here natively on the Nintendo Switch 2. But even with 30 FPS, the game is gorgeous. It's one of the best looking games on the original Nintendo Switch in my opinion. We got 1080p in docked mode and 720p in handheld mode. The only thing though, just because the original Nintendo Switch had 720p screen, 720p resolution of the game was actually native, and it looked better compared to 720p on now 1080p screen of our Nintendo Switch 2. But it's not just the problem of this game, it's the problem with all of the ports from the original Nintendo Switch. And the last one in our list, the game that came the closest to compete with GTA series, Saints Row the Third. One of the best open world games in my opinion ever. It's just so great, and now we can play it on Nintendo Switch 2. The original port from Nintendo Switch wasn't that bad actually, but it had just the frame rate performance issues. But now everything looks so smooth. Even though the original port from Nintendo Switch was in 30 FPS, and I haven't found any information on the native update to 60 FPS on Nintendo Switch 2, the game feels and plays like it's 60 FPS, everything is so smooth. The resolution in handheld mode is 720p and 1080p in docked mode. And even though originally the resolution is dynamic, I felt like just because of the hardware of new Nintendo Switch is so powerful, the resolution always sticks to the highest possible point. Alright world, so this was it for our third-party games test for Nintendo Switch 2. Let me know, what do you think about this video? What do you think about the games that I've presented, that we've tested, and which games are you interested in? Which games you would like to test, you know? If you had Nintendo Switch 2 and you don't have it for some reason yet. So let me know, maybe, you know, maybe I'm gonna do the second part of this video and I'm gonna add your preferred games to that video. So yeah, we'll see. Anyways, if you liked the video, drop a like. If you want to follow this channel to see more content on Nintendo Switch consoles, gaming, like whatever, like TV shows and whatever I do here, then drop a follow. Appreciate it a lot. And that's it. Goodbye world. See you in the next video pretty soon, hopefully.